Yes, they're visible.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'll be presenting a case of Miss H, a 10.5-year-old girl, a resident of Bangalore, and the informant was the mother. She presented to us with presenting complaints of tremor since 2 years and a swelling on the anterior aspect of the neck noted since the past 1.5 years. She had been receiving treatment by a neurologist for the tremors, which involved both the hands. The swelling of the neck had been insidious in onset, the size of a marble to begin with, and increasing gradually in size, and the increase in size was not associated with pain. She had lost weight in the past 6 months in spite of a good appetite. She had been experiencing palpitations associated with anxiety and had noted frequent passage of well-formed stools 4 to 5 times a day. She also experienced heat intolerance and excessive sweating and was fatigued throughout the day. She had disturbed sleep, appeared anxious and irritable, according to the mother. She was studying in 5th standard with good scholastic performance and had no history of lack of concentration. She had no history of difficulty in swallowing or choking episodes or hoarseness of voice, abnormal protrusion of eyes, double vision, redness, swelling or pain. The mother had not noted any aggressive behavior. She had no complaints of muscle pain, hair loss, or depression. There was no history of intake of drugs or prior radiation exposure. There was no family history of thyroid disease or malignancy noted. Birth history. She was born to non-consanguineous parents, conceived after 10 years of married life through IVF conception, delivered at term by LSCS. She was born with a birth weight of 4.2 kg, cried immediately at birth, and had an uneventful postnatal period. To summarize, we have a 10.5-year-old girl, first born to non-consanguineous parents through IVF conception, with tremors since 2 years and swelling on the anterior aspect of the neck since 1.5 years, presenting with palpitations, weight loss, and heat intolerance, with normal development and no significant family history. On examination, she appeared to be emaciated and alert. Her weight was 30.9 kg, which was between the 25th to 50th centile. Height was 154.5 centimeters. She was at the 97th centile. Her BMI was 12.9 kg per meter square, which was at the 3rd centile. And her mid-parental height was 161.9 centimeters, which was between the 50th to 75th centile. On a growth chart, we can note that she was tall for her age, which was her height was more than her mid-parental height, and her height age was more than her weight age. She was afebrile with a pulse rate of 108 per minute. Her respiratory rate was 24 per minute and she was not dyspneic. Her blood pressure was 116 by 62 millimeters mercury. Her systolic blood pressure was at the 90th to 95th centile. She had no pallor, icterus, cyanosis, clubbing or edema. There were no neurocutaneous markers noted. Her eyes appeared prominent, but other eye signs were absent. She had fine tremors of the hand, which was noted especially on outstretching of her hands. Her reflexes were normal, and according to Tanner's stage, she was prepubertal. On examination of the neck, we noted a left-sided swelling in front of the neck, which was 10 centimeter into 5 centimeter, with a smooth surface. The swelling moved with deglutition, and there was no movement with protrusion of the tongue. On palpation, the swelling was firm in consistency uniformly, with well-defined margins, mobile, non-tender, and we could get below the swelling. There were no regional palpable lymph nodes and the right lobe appeared normal. Her neck circumference was 30 centimeter. There was no bruit or auscultation, and when she was asked to lift her hands above her head and so that they touched her ears, there was no flushing or engorgement of the neck veins noted. Her Pemberton sign was negative. To summarize, at the end of history and examination, we have a 10.5-year-old girl with complaints of tremors and swelling in the anterior aspect of the neck associated with symptoms of thyrotoxicosis. On examination, she appeared emaciated, had tachycardia, tremors, and a solitary thyroid nodule. A probable differential diagnosis, the first one we considered was toxic adenoma because there was a solitary nodule which was firm and she had features of hyperthyroidism. The second probable differential was a dominant nodule of a multinodular goiter. The points against this were in a multinodular goiter, the surface would have been bosselated and irregular, and it occurs at an older age group. A possibility of Graves' disease. The points against this is in Graves' disease, there's a symmetrical enlargement of the thyroid gland, and eye signs were absent in this case. A differentiated thyroid carcinoma in this case was kept lower down because there was no symptoms or signs of local invasion, and such as hoarseness of voice, and there was no lymphadenopathy. On investigating, her routine blood investigations were normal. A thyroid function test was done in 2018 when she was visiting the neurologist. Her total T4 was 8.6 microgram per deciliter, TSH was 0.01 micro international units, and T3 was 320 nanogram per deciliter, which was not noticed by the neurologist. When she presented to us, her free T4 was 7.77 nanogram per deciliter. Total T4 was 24.86 microgram per deciliter, which were both elevated. TSH was very much suppressed. It was 0.005 micro international units per ml, and her T3 was 651 nanogram per deciliter. Her anti-TPO and anti-thyroglobulin antibodies were negative, and her anti-TSH receptor antibody was not done. Next, we did an ultrasound of the neck, which showed a large, solid, heterogeneous lesion seen arising from the left lobe of the thyroid,
Sorry,
0.4 into 4 into 3 centimeter, with well-defined edge and internal vascularity. Cystic lesions were seen. There was no calcification or no cervical lymphadenopathy that was noted. The right lobe of the thyroid appeared to be normal. When the thyroid scan, a technetium-99 scan was done, the left lobe of the thyroid revealed a nodule with increased radiotracer uptake by the parenchyma, and the rest of the thyroid revealed markedly reduced radiotracer uptake, suggestive of an autonomous functioning nodule of the left lobe of the thyroid. A 2D echocardiography done.
Sorry to interrupt. Danya,
yes,
you have to minimize the small dialogue that comes up on the right bottom of your screen. You have to minimize it.
Yes, ma'am. Is it okay now?
It's still on actually. Okay, you can proceed. Yeah.
Okay.
Are not moving. Are the slides moving for you?
Yes, ma'am.
I am not able to see the slides moving.
Okay now, sir?
No. Is it moving for everybody?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. They are moving.
Maybe rejoin, sir. Try rejoining, sir.
Okay.
Shall I continue?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, please.
A 2D echocardiography done showed a mitral valve prolapse with mild mitral regurgitation. She was started on carbimazole at a dose of 0.5 mg per kg per day and propranolol at a dose of 1 mg per kg per day. On follow-up 3 months later, her weight was 41.8 kg. She had put on a weight of 10.9 kg and was now at 75th to 90th centile, and her symptoms had reduced. We repeated our thyroid function test, which was now normal. Her free T4 was 1.2 nanogram per deciliter, total T4 was 7.06 microgram per deciliter, and TSH was 1.18 micro international units, and T3 was 114 nanogram per deciliter. But the swelling had not reduced in size, and hence we sought a pediatric surgery opinion. The pediatric surgeons advised an FNAC. A left lobe of the thyroid, FNAC of the left lobe of the thyroid was done, which showed features suggestive of adenomatous hyperplasia, which was categorized as Bethesda category 2. The FNAC reports that thyroid is categorized according to Bethesda classification into 6 categories, depending on the ATP of the cells. A hemithyroidectomy has been planned for this child. So we have a 10.5-year-old girl with a solitary thyroid nodule with features of thyrotoxicosis and with increased uptake on a radioactive thyroid scan, probably suggestive of an autonomous thyroid nodule, autonomously functioning thyroid nodule.
Thank you. Yeah,
yes,
that's a very interesting case. And I just have a few questions. So then you can discuss them. What was your differential diagnosis of a single solitary thyroid nodule in this case? And what is the etiology that is associated with hyperthyroidism, as in this case?
Yes, ma'am. So differential diagnosis of a thyroid nodule, there could be benign and malignant causes. The benign
causes. The previous slide?
Yes, ma'am.
You can go back to the previous slide. Yeah.
Yeah. So palpable solitary thyroid nodules in children are rare, with estimated prevalence of 0.2% to 1.4%, which is 5 to 10 times less than in adults. Despite lower recurrences, they are more likely to be malignant, 22 to 26% in children versus 7 to 15% in adults. The risk factors associated with development of thyroid nodules in children include a family history of thyroid nodules or thyroid cancer, iodine deficiency, prior radiation exposure, history of antecedent thyroid disease, and genetic syndromes such as adenomatous polyposis coli, DICER1 syndrome, P10 hematoma tumor syndrome, etc. And the differential diagnosis of a thyroid nodule could include benign and malignant causes. The benign causes include macrofollicular causes such as colloid adenoma, adenomatous hyperplasia, microfollicular causes such as follicular adenoma, Hürthle cell adenoma, and toxic adenoma. Other causes are the Hashimoto's thyroiditis, Graves' disease, infection, thyroid cyst, infiltrative and granulomatous lesion. The malignant causes, the most common cause in the pediatric age group is the papillary thyroid carcinoma, and the other is the follicular thyroid carcinoma. The rare causes of carcinoma are the medullary anaplastic thyroid carcinoma and primary thyroid lymphoma. They could also be metastasis from the breast, kidney, or the lung. Amongst this, the toxic adenoma, Graves' disease, and the malignant causes present with hyperthyroidism.
What is the percentage of single solitary thyroid nodule that is associated with malignancy in children and adults?
Yes, ma'am. The prevalence of autonomous functioning thyroid nodule in patients presenting with thyroid nodules is 5 to 7.5%. The malignancy present in cold nodules in the pediatric age group is between 9 to 50%, with an average of 26 to 26.4%. Although malignancy is thought to be rare in autonomously functioning thyroid nodule, the rate of malignancy in children with autonomous functioning thyroid nodule is found to be between 0 to 29%. And this is quoted from a study done by Hodax et al., which was a retrospective study done in Rhode Island Hospital, where 242 children were studied, and out of that, 17 were found to have an autonomously functioning thyroid nodule.
Okay, so compared to adults, the risk of malignancy is relatively higher. In adults, there would be practically very less chance of malignancy in an autonomously functioning thyroid nodule, but in children, the risk still remains.
Yes, ma'am.
So I just want to come to the investigations that you did in this case. First of all, some clinical features. You mentioned certain syndromes. So, what was the clinical and the history and examination findings which helped you rule out these syndromes, various syndromes that you have mentioned?
Yes, ma'am. Autonomous functioning thyroid nodule could be associated with McCune-Albright syndrome, and we look for neurocutaneous markers, and there were no neurocutaneous markers such as Café-Oley spots. Then Cowden syndrome, they could present with hyperpigmentation and also with papules, and Palmar keratosis, which was absent in this case, and there was no familial history which points towards a MEN2 syndrome.
Okay, so family history would be very important in all these syndromes.
Yes.
And then other tumors and cancers of other parts of the endocrine glands. So what would be the features? In your case, what were the features that ruled out malignancy or made it less likely?
There were no symptoms associated with local invasion, such as hoarseness of voice, difficulty in swallowing, or choking episodes that were present. And the nodule on examination was mobile and it was firm. In a malignant nodule, it would be mostly solid and it will be fixed to the surrounding structures. And the absence of regional lymphadenopathy pointed towards a benign lesion. But the size was concerning.
Yeah, and generally these malignant nodules are rapidly growing.
Yes,
and
1.5 years.
Okay. So are there any questions in the chat box? Are there any questions from the audience? And also I want to ask you, what were the ultrasound findings that suggested that it was a benign lesion? And was FNSE actually indicated in your case?
In an ultrasound, the features that would point that it was benign was that there was a regular border, there was no microcalcifications found, and the lesion was not hypoechoic. A hypoechoic lesion would point towards a malignant lesion, and there was no regional lymphadenopathy noted even on an ultrasound. An FNAC is not indicated in our case, but the FNAC was done by the surgeons, ma'am, without our knowledge when we referred the child to them. And
So
there was
what
a long waiting period for the surgery.
Okay, what would the indications of FNAC be?
So whenever we have a solitary or suspicious thyroid nodule detected by imaging or physical examination, if a TSH is suppressed, we do a thyroid scan. And on thyroid scan, if the nodule is found to be hyperfunctioning, then we go ahead and do a surgery. So the indication of FNAC is only when on a thyroid scan, the nodule is found to be hyperfunctioning, or if the TSH was not suppressed on the initial thyroid function test.
Or the ultrasound shows some features of
malignancy.
Yes, features like it's a hypoechoic lesion, or there's some infiltration of the borders, a large lesion.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Shriram has raised his hand. So do you have a question?
Am I audible? Just for discussion's sake, I just wanted to learn. I agree that the FNAC, if done in a toxic nodule, may sometimes be very confusing for the cytologists to, give a proper answer. But even then, we diagnose sometimes abnormal cytology. That's a different thing. You said surgery straight away. Just for discussion, why not radioiodine ablation?
The radioiodine ablation done in children in long term is found to increase the risk of secondary malignancy.
Oh, I think as endocrinologists, I think that's a controversial area. I think we are having an expert talking in the next couple of minutes. But because surgery is also very morbid, no? If the surgeon is not that experienced, and a hypopara created in surgery in a child will be more crippling than the potential risk of a radioiodine ablation related rare issue, is what I felt. Yes, and secondly, another question is, this child actually had antibody positivity significantly, if I'm not mistaken?
It was non-specific, sir.
Sorry, I didn't register it.
It was not very high, and it was non-specific. It was 33.
Oh, it was negative. Okay.
Negative.
So, since you're saying that in pediatric age, the thyroid nodules are bound to be more malignant, even in a toxic nodule, even if surgery is planned, suppose in this case for some reason, just for discussion, I want to learn from you, why not do a total thyroidectomy straight away? Because anyway, the other side can develop a nodule tomorrow. That will be a single time procedure, which will be a permanent cure for the child. I think Sir is raising his hand, Dr. Ari. I think we'll listen to you. Thank you. Thank you. If possible, if time permits, you answer. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Ari is raising his hand.
So I think this has been it's a very interesting discussion, and as you hear, there's I would say some controversy in this area, which I was going to touch on in my talk, but actually this will get it maybe out of the way. So I would say that a lot of the confusion about the rate of malignancy in autonomous nodules in children, in my opinion, is based on the fact that there has been some inconsistency in how these nodules are diagnosed in much of the literature. So the ATA guideline proposed that all of these should be resected because of a single case report that reported about a 30% malignancy rate in pediatric autonomous nodules. That series had, in my opinion, a not very precise definition of nodule autonomy, and it included patients who did not have suppressed TSHs and also patients who did not have suppression of the surrounding thyroid parenchyma. So in other series, including the one from Hodax at Brown and our series, which I can show you the data, the rate of malignancy in pediatric autonomous nodules is extremely low, similar to that in adults, which sort of makes sense. There's no sort of physiological reason why we would expect autonomous nodules in children to behave differently than in adults. So I think, and I think other experts who are revising those guidelines believe that the rate of malignancy in autonomous nodules in children is quite low, similar to that in adults. And therefore, I believe in the upcoming version of the guidelines, automatic referral to surgery will not be recommended for concern of malignancy. Now, there's a separate issue about treating the hyperthyroidism, potentially symptoms, large size, and so forth. But the rate of malignancy, I would contend, is probably quite low, and that should not be a major concern in terms of deciding management.
Thank you, Dr. Ari. So one question would be that sometimes when we prepare these patients, we give them, like you give carbimazole, the size also decreases in fact. So, but I think in this patient, the size did not decrease. We've had a
Yes.
couple of cases in which we gave antithyroid medication and the size decreased.
Size remained the same when she came back for follow-up.
Okay. Yeah. And there are some questions. We'll be touching more upon this in Dr. Ari's lecture. Divya has asked, why is routine ultrasound advised for children, all children with thyromegaly, especially euthyroid children? Would you like to answer, Dhanya?
Yes, ma'am. To know if we have missed any nodule on examination, and to look for features of malignancy.
Okay. Yes. So mostly in cases of goiter, we would do an ultrasound to look for any nodules and which we have missed on examination. Okay. RIA would be better. This is from Dr. Shella only, and Dr. Santosh Oleti also has asked the same question. So we'll be discussing this in Dr. Ari's lecture. So I cannot see any